commitments on carbon emissions. And again, we're waiting to hear about what's going to happen on that front. We're going to hear more about that in a moment or two from Helen Clark, who's with the UN Development Programme, the head of the UN Development Programme, in a couple of minutes. But first, let me just take you through why we're here, which is a recycling centre here in Doha. Recycling on a public level has not taken off here in Qatar at all, but this just goes to show the kind of thing that can be done. All this waste you see here will end up as football stadium seats or egg cartons, all sorts of things. This is part of the process. Plastic chips that have been refined down, have been ground down. You can see great bags of them here, and it ends up being melted down from that to this, which is refined plastic balls, which ends up then going back into industry. And really, nations around the world, there seems to be no doubt, need to grasp the recycling mantra to help reduce carbon emissions, which, as you were just talking about, helping make storms like Typhoon Bopha and Hurricane Sandy that the east coast of the United States saw happen in increasing velocity. Our meteorologist Steph Galter has this report.
Listen to it!
The United States has had 11 major weather disasters this year that are estimated to have cost over $70 billion.
But the main problem of getting policymakers to act on the issues of climate change is that as scientists, we can never say that anything is 100% certain. And with the weather having so many unknown influences, saying that any one disaster is definitely caused by climate change is impossible and always will be. What we can say is that some storms are likely to be more destructive in the warmer world than they would be otherwise.
For example, Hurricane Sandy powered across a part of the Atlantic which was warmer than usual at this time of year. Warm waters are the energy source of a hurricane, so this heat would have contributed to the strength of the storm. Also, the sea level along the east coast of the US has risen over the past few decades. This would have contributed to the flooding and the storm surge.
But while we can argue that some storms have been made worse by climate change, up until recently, we haven't been able to say how much worse.
Scientists are now trying to put a figure on it. Researchers at Oregon State University calculated that the severe heat wave in Texas, like we saw in 2011, is 20 times more likely now than it would have been 50 years ago. And the unusually mild weather seen in Britain in November last year, according to scientists at the country's National Weather Service, was 60 times more likely than it would have been in the 1950s. As the number of extreme weather events continues to rise and the link to climate change becomes clearer, the cost of the warming world could become more evident. Steph Galter, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's get an insider view of what's going on at the Climate Change Conference. We can speak to Helen Clark, who's the head of the UN Development Programme. Helen Clark, welcome to Al Jazeera. Good to see you there. First of all, a day and a half or so to go, a day and a half and counting. Tell us what progress has been made. It's very hard to gauge that any progress is being made at all from the outside.
Well, at this stage, you're playing for everything on the basis that if you don't get a result, it's a tragedy. So everybody's very intense in negotiation on all the different streams with the hope and I think expectation that something will come together. The Kyoto Protocol talks, I think, are going on again as we speak, and really getting a second commitment period to Kyoto with some teeth is pretty important for building the trust that will take us forward to the 2015 agreement.
Forgive me for jumping in, but to get a Kyoto agreement with some teeth is very hard to see how that's going to happen. We're talking about those that are signed up to it so far. They only account for 15% of global emissions. You've got no Russia, no Japan, no New Zealand. China and India aren't even involved. America, the United States, never even ratified it. What's the point? Why don't we focus on something else?
Well, the point is that the Kyoto Protocol envisages that developed countries should do more and make firm commitments. And it is unfortunate, as you say, that a number of the countries that should be acting are not acting under the protocol. But it is significant that Europe and Australia and Switzerland and Norway, very important Western economies, are committing. And that helps build the trust for the next phase of a global agreement.
What do you say on that basis about New Zealand, the country you were formerly Prime Minister of, just not wanting anything to do with an extension of the Kyoto Protocol?
Well, what I can say is if I were Prime Minister, it would certainly be making that commitment to be in the next period. So, this is politics back in New Zealand, and those issues are really best addressed to the politicians there.
Okay, one final thing, just the Green Climate Fund, $100 billion a year from 2020. The question is, what happens between now and 2020? A lot of money needed in the meantime.
Absolutely, and that's one of the points of debate. Will the developed countries actually agree to mid-term targets so that instead of waiting to see whether $100 billion miraculously appears in 2020, you'd actually have certain targets to meet on the way towards that date? Clearly that would give greater certainty to developing countries about what they're signing up to here.
Helen Clark, very good to have you on the programme. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. That's Helen Clark from the UN Development Programme. That's it from me for now. We will, of course, keep you up to date with any developments from the Convention Centre as the Climate Change Conference draws to a close.
All right, Nick, thank you.